Chapter 15. Restricted Democracy. A thorough scientific psychology of the workings of universal suffrage in populous nations would be instructive. It is being attempted in the United States, not so much, apparently, for the sake of science, as in the service of business organization and of democracy itself, assumed to be a sacred principle. But between the lines of these statistical investigations, there looms the specter of universal, hygienic hypnotization. For when the statistical psychologists find out what strings and wires move the human psyche, they will have all those strings and wires in their hands, and, being legally commissioned to pull them, will have to do so. And then the truly political question will arise for them. To what end should the race be scientifically caused to act, to think, and to vote? Have they all a similar primal will? Are they all capable of the same ultimate virtues? The white population of the United States is composed entirely of races that in the Old World had possessed distinct and sometimes, as in the case of the Jews, very ancient, exclusive, and tenacious traditions. Had these races arrived in America simultaneously, in the proportions in which their blood now flows in the veins of the United States citizens, perhaps the striking homogeneity of language, spirit, and manners that now appear in them all would not have arisen. But chronologically, during the 17th century, apart from a few Dutch, all the colonists were British, and it was not until the 19th century that floods of Irish, Germans, Jews, Italians, Scandinavians, and Poles added themselves to the British stream which still continued to flow in. Those latecomers plunged into a social and political milieu already highly characteristic. They had institutions, manners, and often a religion altogether new to the immigrants, yet so self-complacent and insistent that it made it difficult for the strangers, unless received by groups of their own countrymen already separately settled and organized, to preserve their old ways. Especially in the larger cities, the pressure of the American method of working and planning for quick returns imposed itself on everyone who wished to keep his head above water. Nobody could afford to sulk or had time to think except about business, and the trade winds of prosperity, ruffling over small personal failures, were so impetuous, hardy, and kindly that the passion for sailing before them was irresistible. This uniformity of American manners and sentiment is a product of contagion. It works from outside, from popular schools, sports, newspapers, films, and political cries. The daily round, so continuous and monotonous, as to become automatic and seem to those who undergo it the only natural thing, might well be expected to cancel all racial and traditional diversity in the people, if the source of it were not external even in the old American stock, and sustained even in them only by mechanical compulsion and social pressure. Everyone is caught in the same vortex, and, in so far as the soul is vocal, in a vocal vortex also. But the human psyche is not altogether vocal or mechanically moved. It has a seminal bent, a spontaneous inner proclivity, often an individual originality, and turn for invention. This was clearly proclaimed by the New England sages of the age before the Civil War. But they were few and idealistic. They were overwhelmed by the major current into which they themselves wished to pass, and they were increasingly subdued to the color of what they worked in, and hailed as prophets of the brave new world that was taking shape in complete disregard of their private spirits. The uniformity in American principles, as proclaimed publicly and as genuinely felt by most people, is no index to natural unity in the vital forces at work among them. The proof appears if we consider a notorious fact. The Constitution of the United States, since the Civil War, establishes the equality of all citizens, irrespective of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. This is not merely a constitutional sham, like so many of the provisions in paper constitutions in other countries. It expresses an earnest conviction, dearly defended by a great part of the people. Nevertheless, whenever a difference of race, color, religion, or breeding is not so overcome in the rush of common work or duty as to pass unnoticed or even unknown, if an attempt is made to ignore it in comradeship, society, marriage, or place of residence, the real difference in the soul is instantly recognized, and an irresistible impulse causes the groups to segregate. This is set down by democratic doctrinaires to prejudice or snobbery. They do not perceive that contrast of character and taste can be ignored when people are engaged in some instrumental action, to which their moral diversity is irrelevant, but that as soon as the labor is over, and the liberal life of play, art, affection, and worship begins, both sides equally require moral comprehension, and are equally chilled, bored, and rendered sterile when comprehension is absent. That a white man ought to hobnob with a Negro because otherwise he would not be Christian or unselfish, involves a flagrant assumption of superiority. The Negro, if he is not a fool, loves his own inspiration and expands in the society of his own people. Vital liberty differentiates. Only vacant freedom leaves all in the same anonymous crowd. The contrast of sentiment on this point between North and South America is instructive. In both, there is confident optimism regarding the future of their societies. But I have read an enthusiastic prophecy made by a young Brazilian who looks forward to the mixture of European, American Indian, Chinese, and African blood to form the most beautiful and gifted race that the world has ever seen. The question is one for anthropologists to discuss and for experiment to solve. European nations, especially the more westerly and southern, are extraordinarily hybrid within the Caucasian family, and have produced a rich and varied civilization, though one singularly unstable and factious. It was in the city-states of antiquity and of the later Middle Ages that the arts and sciences and the pride of their life appeared at their purest, in contrast to Eastern culture, which is more traditional, exquisite, but less ambitious. Ours shares the fortunes of our militant nations, who have never learned how to live. Perhaps only a thorough leveling and kneading of all human protoplasm in universal trough will eliminate from it all the too vigorous seeds of gratuitous violence and madness that now infect it. But then, from that blameless and level lawn that would cover the planet, somewhere one blade of grass would have to grow into a fern and another into a tree, if that varied and tragic flora that we call civilization were ever to rise again. I should like to believe, with a distinguished follower of Darwin, that the secret of moral progress is inbreeding, which allows the special potentialities in one incipient variety of human beings to develop. If the mating organisms are inwardly diseased or unfit to prosper in their environment, that breed will quickly disappear. But when their special predisposition is opportune, they will initiate a special line of progress in human nature and arts. The cultivation of different characters and arts, when such characters or arts are opportune, is therefore requisite for the emergence of any eminent beauty, culture, genius, or virtue. It is therefore a healthy and fruitful sentiment that prompts Anglo-Americans to preserve as far as possible their special traditions in manners, morals, language, and religion. They may fraternize as cordially as the national spirit demands with all their fellow citizens, when they all find themselves essentially equal in ability on the common stamping ground of business and politics. Equality and a ready interchange of leadership work well where equality is real, and there is a natural hierarchy in every profession, wherever the authority of things backs and sanctions the expert. But the mutual attraction of persons and minds with kindred tastes and manners needs no criterion beyond the absolute liberty of the psyche to invent the inspired style of its growth, passionate, speculative, or satirical.